Caddis Maximus here, this time with a quick review of the Harbor Freight AMES LDM-30, part number 64001, laser interferometer. It's actually not a laser interferometer, it's a time-to-distance laser measuring device. This is not an ultrasonic device. This is like this Bosch that I reviewed earlier. It actually measures the laser. Now, the one thing about these Bosches I haven't been able to find out is these all have a red laser built into them, and that is used for you to mark what you're, or to point out what you want to measure. What these things do not make clear is whether or not they shoot an infrared laser out of this lens and then time the distance, or if it's actually measuring the red marking laser itself. The reason I think they actually shoot and receive a beam out of the large lens is when you take a measurement with these. This one also beeps, so it's kind of hard to hear, but you can hear the relay in there. There's a physical relay. This Bosch is easier. There's a physical relay that actually clicks over, and so that would indicate that they would have a higher power infrared LED or laser, and those can be quite dangerous because they're the laser beam that you can't see but will burn your eyes just as good as any laser that you can see. That's what's insidious about infrared lasers, and so that they have a physical disconnect, a relay that actually turns on and off that laser so it isn't accidentally going at any point due to maybe some electronics that are failing. You don't really know if an electronics has failed, but if you don't hear the relay clicking when you're taking measurements, then you know that you may have an issue. Quick physical comparisons. It's a small lightweight unit, uses 2 AA batteries, has kind of a rubberized bottom section, some rubberized, this gray area is rubberized, maybe a little bit of a cushion. And this thing was like, I think $30. You can get it with a coupon or inside track, I believe, for like $30. On the website it says $40. But they're not like one of these Bosches as far as physical build quality. Now, this isn't really a comparison because this is a Bosch that measures 230 feet, where this is a 30 meter or 100 foot. The Bosch also includes a variety of other functions to calculate volume. It has a little bubble level so you can triangulate heights, which is, for me in hiking and doing interior measurements, triangulation is amazing because you don't have to, you can stand in one spot and take all the measurements you need. It's actually pretty cool. So the Harbor Freight isn't going to include a bunch of that. It's a shorter distance. Its laser pointers, or the markers, are up close. They both look the same, but the Bosch is made for a much greater distance, and you can really see that the better optics on the marker laser. It maintains the little. It's not a reticle, but the little dot stays sharp at a much further distance on the Bosch than it does on the AMES. Both of these will measure slightly above. I was able to get about 102 or 101 feet or so out of the AMES before it started really airing out. If I had a really bright or white painted surface, I'm sure I could get a bit more distance out of this. The Bosch, even though it's rated for 230 feet, really has some nice overhead, and I've measured over 250 with it. So that would be some of the additional quality differences. There are some surprising differences that maybe were a little more disappointing when it comes to the Bosch and then the AMES. Is one, the AMES, they actually use, these both can be fitted to a standard tripod. And the AMES, they actually use a metal brass fitting where it's just plastic in the Bosch. Although the AMES is made out of ABS plastic. It's a very poor, thin plastic, and the little overmolding is inconsequential. This thing I would really worry about it breaking apart. There's just 4 little screws in the corners of this AMES, and so it seems it would be rather delicate. The Bosch is obviously much heavier duty, and it's made just like any of their other power tools. It has a very heavy duty battery cover with thick molding. It's very thick. As we can see, it's PA6, which means it's molded nylon, phenylalkyline or anacline, I don't know how to pronounce it. So that would obviously be physical build quality differences. But this Bosch, and it's an older unit, it's 5 years old or so now, going on 6 years old, didn't have a backlight, and that's one of the things I really liked about this AMES, and I'll point that out, is it has a nice bright backlight. And what I also liked about the display is that we can see that it's inverted, so the whole LCD display is black, and then it turns off the segments that you're looking at. Both units have the functionality where you can tell it whether you want it to base the measurement off the front of the unit. The middle here would be about the bottom of the screen square, and then of course the back of the unit. It has this interesting function where if I point it at a grill here, you can see that it's having a hard time picking up the marker, and it has this little signal, just like a cell phone signal, and I think that's kind of neat. It's letting you know that it may be less accurate. It's also lets you know that you may be at towards the limits of the distance. It's really not a big deal with these things, but I still think it's kind of interesting that they'd include that little signal meter. You have to turn on the marker and press clear, and then it will come alive. Now, if I turn it towards something brightly painted, come on, we can see that now I have full signal bar. So it actually is measuring something. It's not just jive that doesn't display anything. If you point at the trees, you may get 2 or 3 bars, but I thought that was just, you know, some type of thinking. I thought that was interesting. Now, turn that off. You can see the backlight. You can see how thin this plastic is. You can see that the backlight is just glowing through the plastic. That's usually not a very good indication of either the quality of the plastic or how thick it is. So that's why I'm so worried about dropping this thing. And you think, well, if it's that bright, why didn't they take and make the logo clear so that the AMES would glow? I think that would have been actually kind of nice. This also has some nice additional functionality. Like the Bosch says, it does include a continuous measurement node. So if you press and hold measure, it constantly is beeping to let you know it's actually doing something. It actually shows you that it's constantly measuring at the little laser beam icon out there. Now it's constantly clicking. If it's at the same distance, then it'll kind of click back and forth, but if you change the distance quite a bit, then it will just continuously measure. And so I thought that's an interesting function. If I can get it to stop. Too bad the beeping can get a bit annoying. And we'll get a couple other measurements here. If you take the same measurement, the exact same number, it will scroll them through, and I did like that functionality too, where it just scrolls through. If you press both buttons at the same time here, it will display 4 different modes. One's meters and thousandths of a meter, and actually gives you a little M. It will display the measurement not in feet and fractional inches, but just absolute inches, which is always kind of nice, and it actually says IN when you're doing that. It'll also give you feet in thousandths of a foot, or standard feet, inches, and then fractions. So they really covered most of the bases that you can cover for $40. Now, some of my criticism about this unit is they should have included a couple basic area calculations. When taking the thumbnail image in the dark, I was actually just able to see a highlight to the left of where the signal display was, where there's a little box and triangle shape like here on the Bosch. And so one of these more upgraded models has that functionality. I doubt it's as simple as opening this up and maybe have them having another pad that they just didn't put a button for, but I'll take a quick look. They did include a little nylon bag, which is disproportionately high quality, especially because they have this AMES, this like really nice embossed, you know, rubberized, sewn onto the bag logo and the lanyard. But for the price, they should have given you a little heavier body and that additional functionality where at least you can do area and volume. That would have been real handy. One of the other areas where they wasted money was they had the manual, but they didn't want it to display in the packaging. So they actually had it sandwiched between 2 cards. So the display cards in the packaging, they're actually doubled up twice. You know, if you want to see what they look like here they are. And I thought, well, they didn't even go as far as to print up, you know, a half of them that were backs only and half of them that were fronts only, so they wouldn't be wasting a whole bunch of extra ink. No. They just are doubling up on these cards, which I think is just a little odd. It took me a minute to figure out what that little antenna radio signal icon was, because nowhere in this manual do they actually mention They mention every other function. It has some various different error codes, but there's error 1, 2, 3, and 6. Who knows what happens if you get error 4 and 5? You know, God help you. We can see here that it actually describes that signal strength icon, but nowhere does it actually tell you what it does, and it took me a minute anyway to figure it out. In this picture of this display, we can see that they never intended to have that functionality, but yet the icon exists on the screen. As far as for 30 bucks, that's one of the cheapest ones of these types of units that you're going to get that's going to be sold at a retail store. That's going to be 100 feet. And the basic functionality, particularly in having a nice little backlit display, since it does scroll up some of the several measurements at once, obviously you can take 2 measurements and multiply them together to get area. Take a third measurement because it will display 3, and that way you can get volume. You just have to manually calculate it. And that's probably one of the reasons they have decimal feet, is so that you can put it in that mode and then just multiply them together to get your different areas and volumes. And pretty much everybody has a cell phone, and there are no excuses. Even old antique flip phones and Obama phones and all that do have calculators in them. Now these things really are pretty reliable. If we take, now there isn't a real question of the accuracy of the Bosch. I need to find something to really make sure that the bottoms of these want to point at the same surface. What's difficult by doing this side by side is if they're at an angle to the surface, they'll take an accurate measurement. That's what's beautiful about these things. Unlike those ultrasonic ones, which you need a big flat surface, you can have a tree branch that you point up at and measure the distance. You can hold a broomstick out in the middle of the room and measure the distance to a 1/16 of an inch, and they're really pretty good. But if you have 2 side by side here, one will inevitably be more skewed than the other. But I think we're doing pretty good. I think the bases are real well lined up here. Both the same measurement, 4 feet, 5 inches and 1/8. We'll do that 3 times. Oh, it got 3/16, so it shifted a 1/16 of an inch, which is obviously those kind of measurements is fine for, especially for like framing, or if you're trying to shore something up, cutting a post. Put this on the ground. Make sure it's set to measure from the bottom of the unit, and you can just cut. You can just cut to that size. It's really pretty nice. We'll do the Bosch a couple more times. The Bosch is a bit more consistent. It is always reading 4 feet, 5 and 1/8. Now, I did buy the Bosch because it has a more triangulation mode. That's why this has... The bubble level isn't for utility on this. It's so that you can take one measurement absolutely level, and then you tilt it up to take a measurement off the top of whatever you're looking at, and then it will do the trigonometry and calculate the height. Using right angle trigonometry, it uses that's why it has to be level. One of the angles, you need 3 knowns, and what it has is one 90-degree angle and 2 different linear measurements. And with those 3 pieces of information, you can calculate the missing side of the triangle. And it sure would have been nice if this had that functionality, because it's all just basically software, but that's what they're charging you for nowadays. There's a huge difference in price of these units, 4 or 5 times. This Bosch, even though this one's like 5 years old, is still like $100. It's real surprising. And it was what was so disappointing about it not having a backlight. And I'm going to end up trying to fabricable something together on that. Anyway, that's generally the end of the review of this little unit. And overall, it's a nice little unit. For the price, if you do a bit of measuring, which doesn't involve a tape measure, or even if you are using a tape measure, for landscaping and that kind of stuff, this is invaluable. Really is invaluable. Instead of breaking out that 100-foot tape and dragging it through the mud a million times, which sometimes you do need it, you can just use this and just do all your placements. If you have certain elements or laying out a fence, once you establish your point, you can actually just go around and have, place each object right where you need it to be, easily within a 1/16 of an inch if you're really vigilant. But in those situations, 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch is obviously fine. And that's the idea behind these, is that they can both measure a distance to a small object and that they're very accurate. And are particularly handy when you have situations where you're trying to do longer measurements and you're beyond the self. And I forget what they call it, but on the Stanley Power Lock, it's about 7 feet, which is how far out you can extend a tape measure before it collapses. And obviously these don't have that kind of issue. Anyway, that was the end of this Catus Maximus review. I'm going to do another couple minutes at the end of this video just to open this up to see what's inside for anybody who's curious, because it looks like it's pretty easy, just 4 little screws here. Otherwise, if you haven't subscribed and enjoy my content, please do subscribe. Anyway, I figured quite a few people would just be interested in the review instead of the teardown. Rather having a separate teardown video, I'm just going to, or what's inside, or whatever you guys want to call it, I'm just going to do it at the end of this video just to make it easier for everybody. And I didn't even mention that at the beginning of the video, but that's okay. We won't worry about that. I don't really want to record another segment just to put on the front of this video, especially when I'm still running this channel off a cell phone. None of that's changed. Where on earth did that just go? There it is. It didn't end up on the carpet. We're even using little Harbor Freight batteries. And let's see if this thing just wants to cooperate. Let me get a little pry toggle. This Bosch is actually a lot more complicated, and there's screws that are behind this label. That's why I've never opened it up. But on the little Harbor Freight, I'm not too scared of it. If we can... It doesn't want to cooperate. Here we go. Now we're getting this little thing to... Whoop. Looks like we're doing it this way. Okay, so the top comes off. Inside this, quite the little mold that they made here. Do they have any place where they even mention ABS on it? Nothing, no idea. So unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's some missing, just a button that they didn't physically put on the front. Indeed, looks like it was more specifically made. Make sure I wasn't incorrect. That was just specifically made for its base functionality. But every once in a while, I've actually picked up a piece of electronics where it literally those were just soft contact pads, and they just didn't put a button, but they actually had the contacts on the board, and when you touched them, you actually got the functionality. These little things right here, I believe, are for factory testing and not actually for additional functionality like that exposed terminal. You can see this is pretty complicated. They have some kind of little processor on there, and then if we open up the back here, there's our little beeping speaker, a little piezo, and you can see that this isn't just a little basic device. There is a variety of circuits and electronics inside there. As you can see, we have some little sensor right up in the front. I don't know if that's a temperature sensor, if it needs to be aware of that to compensate, but it's obvious now that I opened this up that these are actually pretty complicated. You can see that there's that sensor, then there's behind the lens something that has 5 connections, and then there's the standard pointing laser there, which only has 3 connections, so that's kind of interesting. So these things are a bit more complicated inside. I really don't have any idea what this thing with the red and blue wires are up there. That's why I assume it may be a temperature sensor. And then I always hear the clicking, but I don't know where that relay is. And I just realized something. That little thing up there may not be a sensor. That little thing right there may be a little electric motor. And that may be what is making the sound that I'm interpreting as a relay sound. But that's what actually it looks like. It looks like a tiny little microscopic motor that sometimes, like little tiny cheesy store-bought drones and little flying aircraft that use little micro motors like that. So it's kind of fascinating. Maybe somebody else will know more about these. Anyway, now you kind of have an idea of what it looks like inside. Surprisingly complex little units. Anyway, Catus Maximus out, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Bye.